Hi, I'm Ben Brown. I work with the Microsoft Bot Framework team, and I'm here today to talk about our brand new app for building bots, Bot Framework Composer. Bot Framework Composer was released on November 4th, 2019 here at Microsoft Ignite. So if you're watching this video a long time from there, you might want to look for a newer version. Microsoft Bot Framework Composer is an integrated development environment for people who are building bots and other kinds of conversational software. It is a single interface that has all of the tools necessary for building this type of software. It has a visual editing canvas for building dialogue flows and business logic. It also has tools for managing the language understanding content that will be used to understand what your users are saying, as well as a powerful templating system called language generation, or LG, that allows you to format and build custom and personalized messages to send back to users. And finally, it includes a system that allows your bot to remember things and retrieve information about users and the context of the conversation that it's having. You can get Bot Framework Composer from GitHub. You can see the URL up here, github.com/Microsoft/botframework-composer. You download it into your computer and run a couple of command line scripts to get it running, and then you can open up the app in your web browser. Today, I'm going to show how to build a simple weather bot using Composer, which will demonstrate many of the concepts that are available in this app. So here I am on the home screen of Bot Framework Composer. I'm going to start a new bot project by clicking this button up here in the corner, New. So today we're going to create a bot from scratch, but you can see here we have a bunch of templates that you can explore to find out other examples of how Composer works. Click Next. I'm going to give my bot a name. We'll call it WeatherBot 2, because I've already done this. Okay, here I am on the main screen of the Composer dialog editor. You can see I have a single dialog here called WeatherBot main. Inside that, there is something called a trigger. Triggers in Composer in Bot Framework are the things that call your bot into action. It could be something like when the user first connects to the bot chat room, or it could be something like a message has arrived, or it can be a natural language intent. We're going to use all of those during this demo. By default, Composer adds what we call a conversation started trigger. This happens when the user first connects to the bot. To make this a little bit easier, I'm going to name this Welcome the User. You can see that that name has reflected in the nav over here. Now let's create a message to send to the user when they connect. Using this flow here in the middle, I'm going to click the little button, and you'll see a menu of all of the different types of actions my bot can take. For now, I'm just going to use send a response, which tells my bot to send a message back. Over here on the right-hand side, you'll see the property pane appear for that action. I'm going to send the message, "Hi, I'm a weather bot. I can talk about the weather." You can see that that message is reflected here in the flow. So now, before we do anything else, let's start the bot and see if that worked. I'm going to click this button up here in the right-hand corner, Start Bot. Oops, I forgot this. 1 second. Got to turn off our recognizer for now. We have a concept called recognizers, which is how the natural language understanding is used. We don't need that just yet, so I'm going to disable it. After I restart the bot, you'll see a link that appears that says Test an Emulator. I'm going to click that, and it's going to open up Bot Framework Emulator, which is a chat client that connects directly to my bot. And right away, you can see that my welcome message has appeared. "Hi, I'm a weather bot." Now, if I say hi back to the bot, it doesn't say anything back because we haven't programmed it to do anything yet. All right, let's go back into Composer. So we want our bot to go fetch the weather based on a user's zip code. So to do that, we're going to create a new dialog in our bot by clicking this new dialog button. And I'm going to call this new dialog get weather. You can see I'm here in a new empty dialog, and we have a single trigger automatically created once again called begin dialog. This is another special event that fires when a child dialog is first started. So here again, I'm going to click the plus button and say send a response. And here I'll say, let's fetch the weather. Okay, that's enough for now because I want to take this step by step. Let's go back to the main WeatherBot dialog. And here we're going to turn on the recognizer. So making sure to click the very top main dialog. On the right hand side there's a language understanding pane, and from the recognizer type choose regular expression. If you're not familiar with regular expressions, it's a system to do keyword matching and pattern matching in text. It can be very complicated, but for today we're just going to use it for keyword matching. So I'm going to click this add button, and two fields appear, intent and pattern, and in both of those I'm going to just type weather. That basically is setting up an intent named weather that will be triggered when somebody types weather. Okay, now having added that intent, I can go over here to new trigger, click that button, and you'll see that I can pick from what type of trigger I want to use. I'm going to leave it as intent, and then I'm going to pick the weather intent from that list. So this trigger will fire when the weather intent is detected. Here I have a new flow again inside my main dialog, and I'm going to click the plus button and scroll down to dialog management. These are options that allow me to manage and manipulate the dialog system, and I'm going to select begin a new dialog. And from the property pane on the right hand side, I'm going to choose my new get weather dialog. Cool. Now while I'm here in the main dialog, I'm also going to set up another trigger. Since we have one intent that can be matched, we want to make sure that the bot has the ability to respond when it doesn't match that intent. We have a special trigger for that called the unrecognized intent. This will fire anytime a message is received and no other handlers are fired. And here I'm going to send a simple message back to the user. I'm sorry, I didn't understand that. Okay. So let's restart our bot again and click Test in Emulator. Hi, I'm a weather bot. I can talk about the weather. So let's do it, WeatherBot. Weather. Let's fetch the weather. Okay, so our trigger worked, our intent fired as we planned, and the dialog launched and sent our message. Pretty cool. Well, what if I say, hello? He didn't understand that. Perfect. All right. Now let's get back into the programming and make our WeatherBot actually do something. So the first thing we need to fetch the weather by zip code is to collect the user's zip code. Here in the get weather dialog, I'm going to select the begin dialog event again and click the plus button at the bottom of my flow. This time I'm going to tell the bot to ask a question. You can see here you can tell the bot to request a specific type of information, like text or a number. For the purposes of today, I'm going to select text input. Now you can see two new boxes appeared on my flow. This one represents the bot asking the question, and this one represents the user sending the answer back. So we need to set up properties of both of these. By clicking the bot asks node, you'll see the properties here appear, and you can set the prompt. That's another way of saying what question do you want to send. So I'm going to say, what is your zip code? Okay, now I'm going to click the user answers box to edit the properties here. Now you remember I mentioned the bot has a system of memory by which it can store and retrieve information about the user. These memory properties look like this. There's a scope. Today I'm going to use user, but there are a few others that you can learn about later. And we're going to create a new property called zip code. So basically what this means is when the user sends me a message in response to this prompt, the value of that message is going to be stored into user.zipcode, by which I can use that later on in my script. Okay, and finally we're going to click this Other tab, and here it allows me to set up some rules about what a valid zip code is, or what valid input is for this prompt. So a US zip code is 5 characters long, so let's make sure that when a user responds we get 5 characters back. I can do that by typing length this.turn equals 5. This is using our expression language to create a test to make sure that the value this.turn is 5 characters long. And I'll set up another one, int this.turn is not null. That's going to make sure that I got 5 numbers or an integer rather than a mixture of characters and numbers. So if either of those fail, this value will be rejected. Bot Composer allows me to specify an invalid prompt that will be displayed if the value is invalid. Let's try it. I didn't understand. Please send me a zip code in the form 12345. Fix this typo here. Okay, so now our bot will be able to prompt the user and collect that value and make sure it's a valid value. Now let's take one more step here and send a response back to the user just to confirm that the zip code was captured. Okay, let's see how it looks in, and then I'm going to use this curly bracket syntax, user.zipcode. So here we're using the language generation system, which allows me to reference variables in the bot's memory using this curly bracket syntax. You can also embed expressions like the one I just used for a validation and other types of macros in these LG templates, which we'll talk about more later. Okay, let's restart the bot again. And I'm going to click that test and emulator button. Now when I type weather, the bot should prompt me for my zip code. Now let's type an invalid zip code. Hey, I didn't understand. Please send me a zip code in the form 12345. Okay, let's do it. 78704, my home zip code in Austin. Oh, something didn't work. Let me debug this. Oh, this is wrong. This is supposed to be this.value, not this.turn. I can quickly fix this. Make sure that's saved. Restart the bot again. Forgive my mistake there. 78704, a valid zip code. Okay, let's see how it looks in 78704. Okay, great. So now we have a valid zip code in the bot's memory. Now we have to actually fetch the weather conditions for that zip code. We can do that by using we're going to use that. Excuse me. We're going to do that by pulling down the weather conditions from an external API that I created for this demo. And to do that, we use the send an HTTP request option that can be found under access external resources. This is like making a web request from any kind of coding system or even your browser. So here I'm going to set the HTTP method to get, and I'm going to quickly copy the URL of my API into this URL field. Now this is an API I created for this demo, but you can use any kind of publicly available web API or a private API if you have access to that. And you can see here I'm using that curly bracket syntax again to refer to the zip code value so it can be passed as a parameter to that API. I'm going to scroll down here, and in the result property, I'm going to type dialog.api_response. So just like we bound the user's answer to user.zipcode, This binds the response from the API to a variable called dialog.api response that we can use. Now, because I'm a responsible web developer, I'm going to check and make sure that the API call was successful before I use the data. So to do that, I use a if-else branch, which can be found under create a condition. Once I add that to my flow, on the right-hand side, there's a condition field. And here I'm going to type dialog.api response.status code equals 200. If you're familiar with making web requests, you'll know that a 200 status code means a success, and anything else might mean that an error occurred. So now, in my true branch, the branch that goes straight down, I'm going to click the plus button, and I'm actually going to create a new variable to extract some information from that API response. So under Manage Properties, I'm going to click Set Property. And here I'm going to set dialog.weather. And the value of that is going to be dialog.api response.content. So you remember in this step we used API response.status code, which was the status code of the HTTP. And this API response.content is the actual JSON that came back from the API. Now, I'm going to send a response in that true branch again, and I'm going to use the data from the API to send the user their actual weather conditions. So, pasting this in here, the weather is curly bracket dialog.weather.weather, so that's the actual condition, and the temp is dialog.weather.temp. Okay, now to be safe, let's also fill in the false branch. What happens if an error occurs? So I'm going to click send a response, and here I'll just type, sorry, I got an error when I tried to retrieve the weather. And now to clean up the bot's memory, I'm going to click memory, manage properties, and delete a property. And here I'm just going to delete the user.zip code variable to make sure that that invalid value doesn't hang around. Okay, let's restart our bot and see if it works. Hi, WeatherBot. Let's check the weather. My zip code is 78704. The weather is clouds and the temp is 68. It worked! It pulled in information from the internet into my bot's memory and then sent that information in a nice formatted message back to me. Super cool. So now that we have a basically working weather bot, let's flesh this out with a couple more features. I'm going to go back here to the main dialog, and in my language understanding pane, I'm going to add two more intents. One of them is going to be for help, and another is going to be cancel. These are features that basically every bot should have. You always want to be able to help your user if they get stuck. You always want your users to be able to back out if they decide to change their mind. So having created those intents, I can go over here and create the matching triggers. I'm going to leave that type of trigger as intent again and select help this time. You'll see my new flow for the help. And I can send a response that says, I only can talk about the weather. Say weather to get started. Okay. Now let's do the same thing for cancel. Now here in my cancel flow, I'm going to send a confirmation message, canceling, just so the user knows that the bot understood. And then after that, I'm going to use the dialog management menu to select cancel all dialogues. That tells the bot to stop everything that it's doing and go back to the main dialog and wait for the next message. All right, before we test that, let's go back into the Get Weather dialog, select Begin Dialog, and highlight that prompt again. You'll notice at the towards the bottom of the prompt, properties, there's an option that says allow interruptions. Currently it's set to false, which means that the only thing the bot will think about when it's prompting for the zip code is whether or not this is a valid zip code. Now, if I change this to true, that will tell the bot that when a user sends a response to what is your zip code, that it should, in addition to validating that input, it should also check and see if any of the other parent dialogues has an intent that is matched by the message that was sent. This allows this prompt to be interrupted by other intents in the dialogue tree and will allow the user to request help even if they're being prompted for a zip code. Cool. So let's restart the bot again and test an emulator. So here I am at the main dialogue, and if I type help, you can see that it sends me the help message. Now let's start the weather child dialogue. Here I am at the zip code prompt, and I can still type help. You'll notice that it resumes back at the what is your zip code prompt after the help message appears. That's how interruptions work by default. Super cool. Now I can type cancel, and now it didn't resume because the cancel all dialogues action happened and left me back at the main prompt. Pretty cool. Excuse me. So you might remember that in our previous example here, the bot responded with a kind of robotic answer. The weather is clouds and the temp is 68 degrees. We would like our bot to speak a little bit more naturally. So we're going to use some more of the features of the language generation system to format that message in a nicer way. So the first thing I'm going to do here in Composer is open up my navigation menu on the upper left-hand corner and select the Bot Responses tab. This interface shows you all of the messages that are being used by your bot, and this is also a place where you can create new LG templates. So I'm going to click this edit mode up here and scroll to the very bottom of this list, and I'm going to paste in this new LG rule. Whoop. So here we're creating a new LG template called describe weather that actually takes a parameter. That parameter is expected to be the data we got back from our API. Inside this template, you can actually see, excuse me, you can see I'm using if and else if blocks to test expressions to see which version of the message I should use. So if the weather is clouds, it will pick randomly from one of these three options. If the weather is thunderstorm, it will use these three options, etc. You can use these tick marks to create alternate versions of a message, and these if-else blocks to create conditional branching inside a message. All right, now that I've created that template, I can put it to use. I'm going to go back to my flow editor, click Get Weather, go back into the Begin dialog, and down here, I'm going to edit this message and replace it with a version that uses our new Describe Weather template. So you can see again, I'm using curly brackets to wrap my dynamic elements, and inside, instead of just directly referencing the weather variable, I'm going to pass it in to the Describe Weather template. Cool, let's restart the bot and test it again. Weather 78704. The sun is hiding behind the clouds and the temp is 68 degrees. So that's a much more human, nicely readable message than our previous version. And you can see and imagine how you could create more complex and more varied messages based on the data that the API received and the things that the bot has in its memory. Very cool. All right. So now let's use another piece of the LG system to improve the user experience of our bot. The first thing we're going to do is add buttons to the prompt to allow the user to know that they can use the help or cancel commands at this prompt. So I'm going to click the what is your zip code prompt. And I'm going to replace that text with this template. Here I'm using a feature of LG called structured templates, which allows me to construct a message using its attributes like text and suggested actions. So this is constructing a more complex outgoing message instead of just text. The suggested actions keyword allows me to specify what buttons will appear at the bottom of the message. Here I'm using help and cancel. They're separated by this pipe character. At the same time, let's go here at the bottom and edit that send a response that's sending the actual conditions again. And we're going to use a card in this condition as well. Here, I'm going to copy paste it from my text file. So now I'm using the thumbnail card template, and this has 3 attributes that I'm going to use: the title, weather for city, the text. I'm going to use that same string using our describe weather template inside this other template. Pretty cool. And then I'm actually going to refer to an icon that comes down from the API. All right, let's restart our bot and see what it looks like now. I'm going to say weather. Hey, there's our new suggested actions. So now if I click cancel, it will cancel my request. I could also have clicked help, of course. Let's try again. This time I'll give it a real zip code, 78704. Now, instead of a simple text response, you can see the weather is here in a nice card. There are clouds in the sky and it's 68 degrees. And I also have a nice little cloudy icon. Cool. There are all sorts of cards that you can use, including adaptive cards. We're not going to go into that right now, but you can explore that later on. Okay, so now we have a bot that can send and receive information from a user, pull down things from the outside world, and even use nicely formatted cards to present the results. But I still have to type weather to get the weather. And that is not exactly what you expect from an intelligent assistant who knows about the weather. Not that this is all that intelligent. So we want to make our bot a little bit smarter by using the natural language understanding tools available in the Lewis tool. So I'm going to go to the main dialog and under recognizer type, choose Lewis. You'll see that my previous regular expression intents disappeared and it's replaced by a big text editor here that allows me to create a Lewis language model using a tool, a syntax called LU. I've prepared this material ahead of time, so I'm going to copy paste this into Composer. So here we're doing a very similar task as what we did with the regular expressions, but this is going to result in a much more flexible system of triggers. Here you can see I have a weather intent. Each intent is highlighted with a hash mark. And below that weather intent, I have a couple of examples of how the user could ask for the weather. I've also done the same thing for help and cancel. And here at the very bottom, I've defined a zip code entity. This will tell Lewis to look for 5 character strings of numbers, and if it finds them, extract it out and give it back to Composer as a special zip code entity. Now, because I changed the names of my intents, I'm going to have to rewire them up. So quickly, clicking over here on the weather trigger, you'll see that the intent is now blank. I'm going to pick weather. I'm going to go click on the help intent, and here I'll select help. Now, because these are used in a interruption inside our other dialog, I also want to make sure that Lewis is pretty sure that the user has asked for help. Otherwise, it might misfire and reject a zip code. So I'm going to put a condition here. Help.score is greater than or equal to 0.5. In cancel, I'm going to do the same thing. Here, I'm going to test to make sure it's greater than 0.8. That's just going to prevent Lewis from misfiring. Great. Now, you remember we told Lewis to extract that zip code property if it can be found. I want to make sure that we use that and skip the prompt if it's set already. So here in my get weather dialog, I'm going to insert a new action in between these two messages. So it's going to say, let's fetch the weather, and then I'm going to use the manage properties option and click set a property. And here I'm going to set user.zipcode, that same property that we would otherwise prompt for, and I'm going to set that to @zipcode. The @ symbol tells Composer that this is an entity that I'm using. Okay, now let's click restart the bot again. You'll see this time that it asks me for a Lewis API key, which I have. And this will allow Composer to automatically create and manage my Lewis application via the API in the background. You notice here that it's now publishing that model. It takes a couple of seconds to do that. Composer will automatically publish the Lewis model whenever I make a change to it, so I don't have to worry about keeping that up to date. This should finish any second. There we go. All right, I'm going to test this in the emulator again. All right, so let's get tricky. Instead of just saying weather, now I can say something like, can you check the weather? It worked. Even though I didn't just use that keyword, Lewis was able to determine that I wanted to check the weather. That is awesome. Now let's get even more tricky. What is the weather in 78704? Now, if this works, Lewis should be able to extract that entity, pass it to my child dialog, and my child dialog will not prompt me for that value because it already knows what it is. Look at that! Right away, the bot was able to fetch the weather because I had already provided the zip code. So that's about it for this demo. Hopefully you were able to follow along and create your own version of the weather bot. Once again, you can find Bot Framework Composer on GitHub at github.com/Microsoft/bot-framework-composer. And you can find the other bot framework tools at the main bot framework repo. Microsoft/bot-framework, where you can find our whole network of tools for building conversational software and bots. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.